Need more Grok Talk? Well, you can catch new shows Saturday mornings from 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Miss a show? Not a problem. Past shows are rebroadcast here daily from 9 to 11 a.m. Monday through Friday. Join us for 2 hours of unapologetic conservatism. And we're not just armed with opinions.
I have stayed out of this race, and I have remained neutral. As chairman of the Republican Convention, my job is to ensure that there is integrity in the process, that the rules are followed by the rule book. That means it is not my job to tell delegates what they should do. But I've got a message to relay today. We have too much work to do in the House to allow this speculation to swirl or to have my motivations questioned. So let me be clear. I do not want, nor will I accept the nomination for our party. So let me speak directly to the delegates on this. If no candidate has a majority on the first ballot, I believe that you should only choose from a person who has actually participated in the primary. Count me out. I simply believe that if you want to be the nominee for our party, to be the president, you should actually run for it. I chose not to do this. Therefore, I should not be considered, period, end of story.
All right, welcome back to Grok Talk. My name's Steve McDonald. I'm here with Skip Murphy and guest co-host Rick Olson of the Londonderry Fish and Game Club, Grok Talk contributor, and many other things too long to list. But we're not here to talk about him. Sorry, Rick. we can talk about you later. How about that?
Yeah.
We're here to talk about Mark Meckler, who's the president of Citizens for Self-Government, and he's come to talk to us about something that Mr. Paul Ryan just talked about, which is the convention, the idea that they might want to hijack it, which of course they want to hijack it. Skip, go ahead real quick.
Yeah. Didn't he say that I don't want the nomination for Speaker of the House, too?
He did. So, Mark, good morning.
Good morning. How are you gentlemen today?
Good. We're doing great. Thanks so much. So, you just heard the remarks of Speaker Ryan. Do you think he's serious?
Well, I do, and here's the reason I think he's serious. I don't trust any politician, so it's not that I trust what he says, but I do know that Paul Ryan's a pretty smart guy, and I do believe he understands that if he or even anybody else like him, what I would call a third-party interloper here, were to try to obtain the nomination, that it would essentially be the death of the Republican Party.
So do you think the rest of the establishment agrees with him?
I think they're coming along. I would say it depends. If you'd asked me that question a month ago, I would have said no. But I think they're coming to understand that if they want to have a party, if they expect the party to survive the November election intact, that they're going to have to go along with what they don't like, which is somebody who is essentially an outsider taking the nomination for the Republican presidency.
This is Skip, and thanks for coming on the show. And I know that you were one of the leaders when the Tea Party movement started. We started Granite Grok just about a year before that movement really started. So we're sort of contemporaries in that standpoint. But I'm looking at this going, I'm not so sure that the party is going to stay together, period, especially here in New Hampshire, this animus between what we call here the liberty and freedom side of the Republican Party versus the establishment side has been getting to almost a critical point where it's just going to shatter here in New Hampshire. And now with this presidential race, I'm seeing almost the same thing, that we've got lots of factions ready to take their ball and go home. And so how do you see it?
Well, I agree with you on that. I think that analysis is correct, and I think it's correct in most of the country. The question is, what does it look like if and when it shatters? And I would propose, I've been asked since the beginning of the movement, I'm sure you guys have too, is there going to be a third party? And my response is, look, if the Republicans don't get it together, there could be a third party, but that would be really bad for the nation. And the reason I say that is it would take a very long time to build a party apparatus that could take any offices on a national basis. And so I think it would hurt the conservative cause. Parties are meant to be filled with ideas and principles, and the Republican Party is built on a set of principles that are good. It just doesn't operate that way. And so our job as activists on the ground in states all across the country, I've been in 34 states this year, is to take over the party apparatus, not necessarily to abandon it. And what I'm seeing, election by election, year by year, all across the country, more and more the party apparatus is being taken over by folks like us, and it's becoming a truly conservative, liberty-oriented party, but that takes time to do.
We've been battling the GOP establishment in the state, and of course we have Governor Sununu at the head of our pile of crap in New Hampshire, and so it's been a tough slog because he has connections in D.C., so they can pull the plug on money on anybody who doesn't toe the line. But it's been a battle, and it's been getting really, really ugly, which means something to me. It means that we're somewhere near a cusp where we may be able to push this beast over and really start to make a difference. We made some inroads a few years back by getting a chairman elected that was favorable to our position, who was then ousted by the party.
Well, he was a Tea Party leader.
He was a Tea Party leader. He got the GOP chairmanship, and then they found a way to run him out of town.
Yeah, they pulled the plug on all the money.
They did, exactly.
Yep.
And so we need to I guess really what we need to do is we need to find money. We need to find a way to get money in around the GOP machine. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do, and I've seen it happen successfully around the country, and here's the issue. It's not the same old money. It's not the same old people, because they're not going to give guys like us money. It's just not the way it works, right? They like the establishment. They like the perks that come with the establishment. But there are a lot of folks of means who stayed on the sidelines of politics for decades because they don't like that game. And they don't see politics as a good investment because what they're looking for as a return on their investment is more liberty, more freedom, and less government. They're not looking for personal favor. And so those folks are coming onto the playing field all across the country into politics. And the key is, as you take over a party, to ally with folks like those and to have those folks in place before you take over the party. Because what you describe, I've seen happen in several states where there's a rebel faction that manages to take over the party, and then the money just goes away and everything just falls apart.
Well, the one thing that we did learn in the last election cycle is that the GOP establishment ran a couple of candidates here in New Hampshire, Mark, that basically kind of insulted. I'm not sure I can come up with any better word. Grossly insulted the base. We had Walt Havenstein basically call the Tea Party all teabaggers and never apologized for it. And we here at Granite Rock made sure that people heard that message over and over and over again. He was asked probably at least a couple dozen times, will you apologize now that you know what that slur means? And he refused. He lost in the general election. Then we had Scott Brown. Yeah, thank you, Steve. Then we had Scott Brown, who was running from formerly the U.S. Senator from Massachusetts that the Tea Party helped to put into office. Then he came up here, tried to run again, and tried to out-abortion the current Senator Jeanne Shaheen.
Reigning champion of abortion.
Right, and and he really severely ticked off a lot of the conservatives here in the state who are also pro-life, and he did it with wild abandon. I mean, he was on the airwaves with his pro-abortion message, and he lost his race too. So the message that was learned was that we may not be able to beat you, but we can certainly make you hurt and lose.
Well, and that's really an important message because they cannot win without the base, and they do have to be able to cater to the base, and the base actually has a winning message. So you're right, we may not be able to beat you because we may not have the money and resources, but they're going to have to come around if they want to start winning elections. They're going to have to come around to the policies and the kind of principles that the base represents.
Now, you've been around the block here a bit. I want to ask you this question because I see a lot of parallels in the first 15, 16 years of this century as the last century politically, when you had Roosevelt and Beveridge and the Bull Moose Party and the progressive movement on the right battling with the progressive movement on the left for power. Ultimately, that led us to somebody by the name of Calvin Coolidge, who was awesome. Do we have a Coolidge in our future? Please say yes.
I do think we do. I mean, I can't point to who Coolidge is for our future, but it's inevitable. In other words, government has grown to the point where even internal government agencies, Office of Management and Budget and the GAO say this is unsustainable. Yeah, Coolidge isn't much remembered. You guys remember him, and a lot of us on the right in the movement remember Coolidge because he's the guy that they say didn't do anything. And they say he didn't do anything because what he didn't do was build big programs and spend lots of money, right? He is a guy who learned to live within the budget and cut the federal government. And so I think somebody is going to fulfill that role inevitably, simply because numbers are numbers, and what cannot continue will not continue.
Well, almost $20 trillion of national debt, where the debt service itself is the fourth largest right now item in the budget. I mean, it can't, to use the Greens' words, it is unsustainable. But nobody seems to. I am just absolutely awestruck by how little the national debt play has been gotten. And I'm going to be honest here. We here at Granite Rock have endorsed as a blog site Ted Cruz, and we've interviewed him several times. But also, our friend in the room here is also a Donald Trump supporter.
I'm a dissenter, yes. I want to burn it down and go.
But he's one of the more sensible ones because he shakes his head when some of this weird crap happens with Trump. But anyway, go ahead.
And I'm looking at this going, all right, with Ted Cruz, I mean, we've interviewed him, 4 or 5 times at this point?
Yeah.
And so we feel fairly confident that he might be a silent Cal. But and you know that I'm not a bomb thrower when it comes to the Donald. But in listening to him lately, I'm going, I don't know what would happen if he becomes the nominee and going forward. But we do know what we're going to get with a Bernie Sanders, the open socialist / communist.
Where's that
face punch nobody goes to the Kremlin for their honeymoon unless they're an arch communist. And given that Hillary is an acolyte of Saul Alinsky, who also was a communist, so we've got an open communist and a silent communist running on the Democrat side. I mean, how hard is it going to be when already the executive branch agencies all think that they're governments in and of themselves, and the Republicans in Congress are not doing a thing to stop it?
Yeah, and I don't expect them to do a thing to stop it. Look, your analysis on the candidates, I wish I could tell you I had something brilliant to add to it, but I read it almost identical. In other words, if I had to choose right now, if I had to pull a lever, it would probably be for Ted Cruz. If I look at Donald Trump, I would say I'm not exactly sure what he's going to do, but I like some of the rhetoric. I like the burn it down kind of rhetoric because I think that's where I'm at. My big caveat with Trump is I actually have no idea what he would do the day he got into office. And it's really hard to say based on his history. You got to judge a person based upon their actions and history, and it's really hard to say how he would govern. I find that a little bit scary. But I'm less scared of that than I am of a communist presidency, which is, I agree with you. I think that's what you get out of Bernie or Hillary.
Yep.
Oh yeah, big time. Because you're looking at, do I leap off this cliff without a rope, or do I tie the Trump rope to myself and see if it holds? That's what it comes down to.
Well, I think once Bernie's out of the race, he can go back to Bread and Puppets Theater over there, Burlington, Vermont. You ever heard about that, Bread and Puppets?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to do a blog on that. But
I mean, the problem with Bernie even getting out of the race, though, is you can be darn sure that he's going to play a prominent role in whatever eventual administration she puts together if she's elected. And that's the flavor of the day in the Democratic Party. It's not your papa's Democratic Party. This is the Democratic Socialists or the Democratic Communists of America.
Yeah,
how about Bernie next to Bill on the Supreme Court? Eat!
You're right. He's not going to get out of this race. He raised more money than Hillary this last quarter.
Yeah.
That's just, and it is, you have to look at it from a couple of standpoints. One, he's raising massive amounts of money from very small donations, which shows that you don't have to have the big money guys to be successful. But then on the flip side, for us who are constitutionalist, liberty and freedom kind of folks, I'm thinking, how many people really want socialism here in the United States?
My neighbor.
Money's no longer a metric, and when we factor in John Kasich, the man of La Mancha, the Don Quixote of American politics, there's if anybody's fighting windmills here, he is. He's out there talking to people. He's glassy-eyed, the man with a perpetual frown, talking about he can be the nominee, and where the heck is this guy coming from? Well, he's an enigma.
Yeah, Mark, I got a question for you on John Kasich, where I put up the image where he agrees with Bernie and Hillary on 5 major issues. And now he's saying, being reported today, that the Washington Post is all in favor of him for the editorial board, because he's now saying the Republicans ought to be adopting some of the Democrat issues. And I'm going, what the heck? And now toss in, if we go to a brokered convention, does he even have a shot at this? I mean, this is scaring me. Here's a Democrat. Well, I'll stick with just Kasich for right now.
Don Quixote.
Yeah, but basically a Democrat in Republican. Oh, gosh, we got lots of those kind of people, don't we?
Yeah,
Congress is full of them.
And does he have a chance? I think the answer is no. And, there's, to me, a lot of this is much ado about nothing about this brokered convention idea. And here's why. It takes the delegates to set the rules. So the rules are different at every convention. There is a Rule 40B, and 40 was put in place during the Romney camp, and it was put in place to prevent somebody who hadn't won at least 8 states from taking the nomination, preventing a brokered convention, right? And that rule is in place right now. It can be changed by the delegates, but the delegates, the vast majority, 70-80% of the delegates, will be controlled by the Cruz and the Trump camps. You got to ask yourself the question, are they just going to decide to be nice guys and change Rule 40 to give John Kasich a chance to be the nominee? Yeah, exactly. That's not going to happen, right? Nobody's going to describe either of those guys as the nice guy who just want to let somebody else in.
No, we want Marion Barry.
That would be just as rational a choice as John Kasich.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I just don't believe that that's even a plausible scenario. What's going to happen at that convention, they're going to go in, nobody's going to have the majority, they're going to go to multiple rounds of voting, and whoever can convince the most delegates that they're the ones that can win the nomination, they're going to win that nomination. And I wouldn't predict right now. I think it's pretty obvious right now that Cruz has the better delegate operation, operating according to the rules. But if you ask yourself who's the better salesman, who can whip the delegates into a frenzy, that seems to be Donald Trump. So, right now, to me, at convention, it's a toss-up.
Well, right now, the numbers are saying that Donald Trump's going to be 57 delegates short for the first ballot. How do you think the second round's going to go, based on what you just said?
Well, I would say if I looked at it on straight politics, which if you look at anything on straight politics this year, you end up being wrong. But I'm going to do the straight political analysis first and say Ted Cruz has an incredible ground operation. He knows how to work the system. He's got a great team. His delegate operation headed by Ken Cuccinelli, really good conservative guy, and a bunch of other folks who are working it. And they're going to have things lined up pretty well. And here's the huge caveat. To me, this campaign is coming down more to marketing and branding than politics. And I've never seen anything like it. Donald Trump is a marketing master, right? I mean, it's just incredible. The guy knows how to build a brand. He knows how to craft a message that resonates and stay on message. And in that convention hall, there's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing. Remember, in that convention hall, this is not like an election, like a normal election where all kinds of FEC rules apply. You can essentially straight out buy delegates. They can fly them around the country. They can give them rooms at Mar-a-Lago. And if he's only 57 delegates away, it is entirely possible that Trump manipulates stuff and bribes people straight out and convinces them that he's the guy, and he ends up with the nomination. So I think it can go either way. It could play straight politics, or it can go to branding, marketing, and political chicanery, and it could end up being Donald Trump.
We got about a minute. Real quick, let's say Cruz does win the second ballot by some magical whatever, anyway, the delegate game or whatever it is. How does he get Trump to go along and not lose that entire block of voters who have been pretty militant and willing to repeat anything the guy says, that Mr. Trump says about him? And so, I don't know, how does that work out?
I think right now, if I were to say right now, I think it doesn't work out well. I think it works out really poorly. I think Cruz, the place where I would say he's really failing is in this narrative game, in the marketing game. And he's not giving them a reason to go along. And Trump is laying out this narrative that this is stealing and this is cheating and this is dishonest. And I think the Cruz camp is doing a very poor job of countering that narrative. And that voting bloc is going to be repressed. And they're not going to be enthusiastic. They're not going to get money. They're not going to work for Cruz. I think ultimately they'll probably vote for him in a general election because they don't want communists in the White House. But I just think it's a long hoe for him, and I think, if you guys have him on the air, you got to ask him why he's not countering that narrative.
All right, we got to go. Thanks so much. How do people reach you or find out what you're doing?
people can go to selfgovern.com and find out how to take the government back for the people.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mark Meckler, you have a great weekend.
You too.
Thanks. All right. We're going to take a little break. We'll be right back with us.
Excellent.